Hello explorers. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about tests, and I'm going to talk about why we do tests, what is a well-tested application, and how do we build a well-tested application. And this is a very controversial subject. I think there is a lot to be said in this subject, and there's a lot of different opinions about what a well-tested application is and how you to write it. Well, if you look at just the tests, so why do we write tests? Who do we write these tests for? I would say there's a lot of different, I would say there's a lot of people and a lot of different stakeholders that you write the tests for. For instance, you have acceptance tests that checks that the application actually do what it was intended to do. So it follows some specification, and these acceptance tests are more for the customer. It's not so much for the programmer to know that they have done the right thing. It's more for the customer to say that, okay, you have actually implemented what I was ordering. And then you have the kind of test called compliance test, where somebody has put forth some rules that this application must follow in order for us to accept this test. So those are more stringent, and those require that you actually follow and do some steps in an exact manner. And most of the compliance tests I've seen is in banking and in payments and so on. So a payment provider could have a compliance test that you implement this function in this way, or else we will not accept that you take payments for us. And then we have regression tests, and I really like regression tests. And those are, I would say, for the programmer and for the customer in some way. But you write those just to say that this thing that happened that was not good will not happen again. So you write a test that actually checks that your program will not end up in this state again. So this is something that has happened. It's a bug that you don't want to happen again. So you write a test to ensure that you won't encounter this bug again. Security tests. These are the hardest tests to write, because the security tests, in my mind, is the test that check that this thing that we are afraid could happen should never happen. So you write a lot of tests that checks that this should never be true. And that could be that this failure state should never be triggered. The world is full of possibilities, so it's really hard to check all the security vulnerabilities that you could check. For instance, you should actually fuzz every input parameter, every data point, in order to actually check that some input or some data won't be vulnerable to your system. And it's not feasible to do. In some cases, when you write really robust systems, you might have tested with a lot of use cases, but you haven't tested all, because that's really hard to do. And then we have the smallest tests, the unit tests. And these tests are written mostly for you, the programmer. So you write a test before you write your code in order to check that you actually have written the code that you were intending to write. So the logic that you intend to write is the same logic that you actually written. And these tests could be a good source of documentation and actually prove that your application do what you say it should do. And if you have a well tested application with a lot of unit tests, it's much easier to find your application and, as an outsider, say that this library or this application is something that I want to use because it does what I think it should do, just by looking at the tests. So it's a really good way to self-test an application. Another test we have is integration tests, and those are a bit larger in my experience. So these are the tests that actually check that an application as a whole works well, so you can actually check the different parts together and see that this thing could talk to this thing, and that the APIs between them are something that we expect. So what do I think is a good, well-tested, robust, secure application? Well, this might be controversial, but I actually think that a well-tested, robust application is an application in use. So if you have, let's say, 100 customers that use your program every day for a whole year, that, in my mind, is a robust application for those users. So if you build something that is intended to be used by 100 people, those people use it for a year and haven't found any problems with it, that's very secure, very robust, very good application for those users. Because those users may try to use application in an unintended way, or may try to use the application in a way that they haven't done before, but that is very unlikely. But you have actually tested that application with the current user base. So when you get new users, you also get more testers, and you get a robuster application. If you add functionality to a program, it gets less secure, less robust with how much you add to it. To branch over to my last question, how to write a good, well-tested and robust application. In my mind, that is actually something you do by incrementally adding very small features over a long time and have a lot of users using it. Or, in my case, or in many other cases, building applications that handle a lot of data. Because data points are actually users in some sense, or at least use cases. So if you have a system that had a lot of data flowing through, and that data is very divergent, you have actually something that is tested for all those data points over time. So if you incrementally add things and it doesn't break, and you test it over and over again with the same amount of data, and the data pool that you test against grows, you will probably have an application that is pretty well tested and pretty robust. But if you just have an application in a vacuum that you have written a lot of unit tests for, I would say that that is not a well-tested application by definition, because that application is only tested by you. It's only tested by your logic and by the rules and the actual use cases that you have come up with. And another user might have a completely different set of use cases that you couldn't even imagine. That's how I think about testing. Might be a bit controversial. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section, and I hope that you learned something today, that I piqued an interest in something today, and I really hope to see you in the next video.